Have you ever been given a second chance, a new start, to just begin again with a clean slate? A 13-year-old girl named Eliana was very happy living with her father in New York City. Her father, Horatio, had a deli, and he had a good business, and he took good care of his daughter until one day his deli was robbed, and he was shot and killed. Eliana, of course, was grief-stricken, and she was sent to live with her mother. Her mother was a drug addict who was almost never home, and she lived with her mother, Eliana's grandmother, who was very, very strict. And Eliana fell into such depression and such grief, she could barely function. She would come home from school and push the dresser in front of her bedroom door so that her mother and her grandmother could not come in. They would not allow her to attend any after-school functions. She could see no friends. They were extremely protective of her, and she didn't understand it. And her teachers noticed the change in the girl, and they sent her to Dr. Lisa Miller, a psychologist, for help. Now, I've talked about Dr. Miller here before. She is a Columbia professor who wrote a book called The Awakened Brain, and she spent her life studying how depression and spirituality exist in the brain. And when Eliana came to see Dr. Miller gave her the standard depression test. Most people score 4 or 5. If they score 10, 11, 12, that means this person has some depression and we need to treat them very carefully. Eliana scored 27. Dr. Miller knew it was going to be a long road for her healing, and she began to work with the girl and invited her parent, her mother, and her grandparent to come to the meeting. And as she sat with all 3 generations of this family, she found out that the grandmother and the mother had both been abused when they were young teenagers, about Eliana's age. And that was why they protected her, why they wouldn't let her leave the apartment. Eliana was amazed to hear this story. She had never heard it before. Her grandmother agreed to 2 things. Her grandmother agreed that they would have a memorial service for Horatio so that Eliana could mourn for her father. And she also agreed to allow the girl to go to some after-school activities that were supervised. A couple of weeks later, Eliana came to see Dr. Lisa Miller for her appointment, and she was a different person. She was smiling. She was almost bubbly. She was glowing with light. She was a completely different girl than the one that Dr. Miller had met before. And so she asked her, "What has changed?" And Eliana said she went to a school dance and met a boy. This boy's name was Horatio. A very unusual name, but when she met this boy and began to talk to him and heard his name, she felt her father's presence all around her at that school dance. She knew in her spirit that she was loved, that she was guided, and that she was never alone. She scored 5 on her depression screening test that day. Now, her relationship with the young Horatio did not last, but the light inside her did. The change in her was remarkable. She moved from this place of great darkness into this place of light. In our reading today that Pat shared with us, we have Nicodemus, who is also in the dark, and Jesus is inviting him to come into the light. Now, we're in John's Gospel, and I love to explain, and you've heard this before, that John's Gospel is deep. It has layers of meaning. And if you read it at the surface level, you are missing the meaning. So everything you read in John's Gospel should ask you to question it. What is really happening here? Now, John doesn't have Jesus do any miracles. Instead, John has signs that show the reader, show the listener that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. And John likes opposites. John likes to use good and evil, light and darkness, the spiritual world, and the material world. We often see opposites in John's gospel. When we see Nicodemus coming at night to see Jesus, this is symbolic. It means Nicodemus is in the dark. He's a leader of the Jewish people, a religious leader, but he understands nothing about the spiritual. So Jesus tries to explain to him that if you want to understand what is happening in the spirit, you have to be born again, or born anew, or born from above. Those are all good translations of the Greek. And Nicodemus takes that on surface value and says, I have to be born from my mother again? This guy just really is in the dark, isn't he? He does not understand at all. And so Jesus tries to explain to him what it means to be born again. Now, Nicodemus doesn't understand it, and neither do many, many Christians. Many churches, many pastors think they have it figured out. This is what you do to be born again. Some will tell you you have to accept Jesus into your heart. Some will say you need to pray a specific prayer, or you have to believe a certain doctrine, or you have to be baptized, or you have to speak in new tongues, or you have to come up front during an altar call with tears and put on a show and let everybody know how sad and sorry you are and how much you need Jesus. And of course, no matter what, you have to be a member of that particular church. Then we'll know that you are born again. What does it mean to be born again? Dr. Lisa Miller has been studying the brain, and she can tell you where in the brain the activity lights up when you are praying, when you are participating in some spiritual activity. And she believes that people can go their whole lives, like Nicodemus up to this point, without any activity at all in that part of the brain. But something can happen that will bring your spiritual brain online. And there are 3 signs. And Dr. Miller has measured this. So she knows this is what happens. When a person knows they are loved, and they are guided, and they are never alone, they are part of a community. When those 3 things come together, that spiritual center in your brain kicks on, and she can measure it in an MRI. She will see it. Now, when somebody prays the sinner's prayer or asks Jesus into their heart or comes up to the altar steps crying and asking God to help them, they may very well feel loved and guided and part of a community. And that does evoke a feeling, a visceral response in the body, and then they know they are born again. And then they expect that everybody will have the same experience as them. But that's rarely the case. We all experience those qualities of being loved and guided and never alone in different ways. And it's different for each person. Eliana had all 3 of those things happen. Nothing in her outside world changed, but she knew in her soul that she was loved and guided and her Father was still with her. And her spiritual brain came online. Nicodemus has a little bit of a longer road. We don't see in our reading today any big change in him. In fact, we don't see it for a while. So Jesus speaks to him in a way that he can understand. He gives him something to take with him and chew on for a while. Jesus gives him the story of the snakes. This is from Numbers chapter 19. Hebrew Bible, old story, where the people of Israel are disobedient, as people are, and God sends poisonous snakes into the camp, as one does, and the snakes bite the people and kill them, as snakes do, and then God felt bad, so the story goes, and had Moses create this bronze snake and put it up on a pole, so that if you were bitten by a poisonous snake, all you had to do was look up at the bronze snake and you would be healed. The thing that causes you the most pain and fear becomes the thing that saves you. It is a shift in perspective. It is showing you that all these things are connected. Now, you might be able to understand it better if you just think back a few years when you did that one thing that you wish you hadn't done that was a big mistake, and there was some fallout from it, and you're really sorry about it. And today, you can look back at that one thing and say, you know, I learned a lot from going through that, and I am a better person today because I did that. I learned from that mistake, and now we can see the mistake and the struggle a little bit differently. It becomes part of who we are, and we are all connected. So the snake is an idea or a story that Nicodemus carries with him, and we see Nicodemus again in John's gospel. He kind of disappears after our reading today. And then in chapter 7, he pops up again and he defends Jesus. And then in chapter 19, Nicodemus pops up again and he helps lay Jesus' body in the tomb. So there is something happening in Nicodemus as we go through the story. God is working on him, just like God is working on all of us as we go through our stories. Now, there is one more verse in this reading that we absolutely have to talk about, and that is John 3:16. Maybe you've seen signs at sporting events that say John 3:16, or you remember Tim Tebow with the black paint on his face that said John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him will not perish, but will have eternal life. It's a powerful verse, and it's also a verse that we have used to divide. We have said, if you believe in Jesus like I believe in Jesus, you're on the right side of the line, you're on the in group. But if you believe differently than I believe, then I'm so sad for you because you're going to perish. If you don't believe at all, you're really in trouble. And if you're asking questions because you don't really know what to believe, you're still going to perish. So maybe I could just help you along. Just hold still while I tie you to the stake. Hold still while I arrest you and deport you and send you to some jail somewhere, because if you're not in the in group, you're going to perish anyway. So you might as well start now. Now, no Christian who goes to church on Sundays is ever going to say that, but we see evidence of that kind of thinking. When you go back and you think about the slaveholders who went to church every Sunday, even taught the Bible to their slaves, leaving out a few parts, of course. But Christians have used John 3:16 to divide instead of bringing us together. And when I talked to my friend Mark, who's a minister in Illinois, about this verse, he said, what a shame that we pull that out of context. It needs to be read with verse 17. And I said, what's verse 17? I didn't even know what it was. It's the next verse right after John 3:16, and it says, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save it. We would be better Christians. We would be a better planet if we concentrated more on the saving part and a little less on the condemning part, don't you think? Dr. Lisa Miller was at a conference one day, and she met two people who did just that. They concentrated on the saving and not the condemning. She was speaking at this conference, and she saw two people out in the audience who were just glowing with this inner light. And she made sure she met them afterwards. It was Dr. Gary Weaver and his wife, Colleen. And Lisa Miller wanted to know why the bright countenance. Why did they look the way they looked? What were they doing in their life that they were just glowing with that light from inside? And so she rearranged the seating arrangements at her table so that they were right beside her. And she asked them about their work. And she found out that the Weavers had spent 30 years rescuing teenage boys who had been horrifically abused and become abusers themselves. These boys were all stuck in the judicial system. They were all one step away from lengthy prison terms as adults, but they were not adults. And the judge would refer them to the Weavers as their last chance. This is the last chance they have to turn their lives around. And so they would go to the Weavers And the Weavers had an 85% success rate in working with these boys. And they even adopted 28 of them. When Lisa Miller heard this, she wanted to know all about it. What was happening? What was working? How were they doing it? And Dr. Gary Weaver said, it's so simple. We take them out to the desert, to our place where there's no distractions, where they can be quiet. And then we have a simple spiritual practice called holding counsel. And the goal of this practice is so that these boys will know they are loved, they are guided, and they are never alone. The same 3 markers, those signs that Dr. Lisa Miller had found in her studies, those 3 signs that show us that the spiritual part of the brain suddenly comes online. So she said, right there at the luncheon table, let's do the practice right now. Let's do it. I need to know what it is. And it's only about a minute long. And so I would like all of us to do it together too. Holding counsel is a way of just sort of using your imagination with no Christian language attached, because unfortunately many of the boys had been abused by religious people. And so we'll use words like higher power instead of God, okay? But you can use your own word as I speak. But what I want us to do is just kind of take a deep breath for a moment and exhale, relax. If you're comfortable, close your eyes. If you're not, just soften your gaze. Set before you a table. The table can be large or small, and invite to this table anyone, living or dead, who has your best interest at heart. As your people come to this table, ask them if they love you. Now invite your higher self, the part of you that is eternal and timeless, the part of you that will live long beyond the days your body lives, and ask you if you love you. And now to your table, invite your higher power. Whatever that may be to you, the source of life, and ask if your higher power loves you. And now look around your table and see all those who are seated and ask them, what do they want to tell you? What do you need to know right now? And take a few seconds to listen.